Warning, this review will spoil everything. This anime, this series, the games that came before, everything. The only thing I'm not referencing is V3 for obvious reasons, but if you want to remain clean, turn away now. I juggled with the idea of doing a spoiler-free review, but no. Fair to say, I went into this anime as a total fanboy, and there was no way for me to twist my experiences around to fit someone distant from this series. Not to mention that the premise as is requires knowledge of everything that's come before anyway. And I put in the hard yards for this one. I even watched the anime adaptation of the first game just to get a feel for how this one might have unfolded.
Nope. The core curriculum here was despair.
It was pretty lame. But not as lame as it could have been, which was basically all I hoped for from DR3. I set the bar pretty low in this one even as a massive fan, so let's get into it. Oh, addendum, if you see the videos coming from different sources, it's because I was watching this series in pretty disparate fashion. I've paid for a subscription that lets me watch DR3, here's my proof, but on the flip side, Funimation had a hell of a time getting a lot of episodes out on time, leaving the fans to really pick up the slack. So, got it? Let's go. So at the end of Danganronpa 2, when the 77th class is pulled out of the Neo World program, and Makoto and friends head back to report to the Future Foundation, it turns out they didn't like him going behind their back and saving the embodiments of despair, and they've been fighting to kill them for years. So if you were confused about the promotional material that had Makoto in handcuffs, this is why. He's basically on trial. And I like this, we never really knew much about the Future Foundation, but we find out quickly that all of the guys at the top are dicks. It's different. You start off as the audience not liking everyone, and it gives a bit of dimension to make the guerrilla setup of DR2's VR program make more sense. But once everyone's in to start the conference, whoops. Oh friend, it's been too long. The episode ends when the first victim of the final killing game is shown, and the next episode picks up at Hope's Peak from years ago? Okay, one of the show's gimmicks is the duality between both arcs, and you're very much meant to watch them in the order that they aired. Future Arc 1, Despair Arc 1, and so on. It worked better than I thought it would, but still couldn't quite eclipse my impression of it as a gimmick. Though not for lack of trying. Chisa Yukazome is the Future Foundation's first casualty, and yet she's the first person you see in the Despair arc and is established as one of its main characters, which is hilarious black comedy. But this ironic echo can go from subversive to annoying. The third time Chisa told me she'd die for you, Narukami, it felt like Kodaka was sitting next to me elbowing me in the ribs going, "Do you get it?" Anyway, this review is not just going to be a confused Matthew play-by-play, but if it was, I'd have bugger all to say about the first two episodes of Despair. It's just reintroducing us to the cast of DR2 we know and love, and ultimately making the same jokes. Like, yes, Ibuki makes abrasive metal music, we get it. The second episode culminates in hilariously overblown ship fuel, but it's just trite slice-of-life comedy, the kind I feared would fill the entire Despair arc, simply because it brought the comedically charged cast of DR2 back. Of course, things change at episode 3, where the vaguest case of the second game is explained in more detail and given more emotional traction. It's at that point it starts to recover. I kind of liked seeing the Twilight Syndrome case in full, if only because it was the wonkiest murder mystery between both games. And the revelation that both girls who died were kind of basket cases adds layers to it all. Mind you, it's also around this time where the anime makes probably its biggest error, but we'll get to that. Past this point, the duality between the two arcs isn't completely disparate, but aside from an offhand line in Future Episode 4 becoming the crux of Despair Episode 4, it's all rather minor, little asides that foreshadow events in the other arc's next episode or two. Future kinda stays the course of a mystery show for a while. People die, tensions form in the party as they try to figure it out and escape everything. More people die. Most of the quality at this point is aesthetic. For one, I love the opening. The theme is this big, gothic, symphonic J-pop number with a nervous and erratic melody and this crazy good ascending violin line. And it shows grisly corpses of all the cast members, even the ones that don't die by the end. And the colour palette going towards blacks and dark greens, combined with the lack of music and just how few jokes are in this one, boosts the atmosphere of the Future Foundation's killing game so much. And it fits because the people involved are on the older side, they're grizzled adults, some of whom already hate each other. It's as far removed from having a bunch of kids who don't know each other try to kill each other. That said, the difference in setting creates its own problems. For one, the bear and the group state at the beginning that all of the exits are cut off and they're truly trapped, which I found very hard to believe for the longest time. Future, unlike the two games, does not take place in a location new to the participants and out of their control. It's in Future Foundation's headquarters. They should know this location back to front. And yes, while this would presumably include the traitor, it still makes the killing game conceit feel contrived and thin, even though the rules don't involve class trials this time. The final explanation doesn't help with this as much as you think it would either. The killing game actually takes place beneath the Future Foundation HQ, in an underwater bunker that almost completely copies the building, so you'd think the traitor would be the person who commissioned the construction of the original building, because he's the only one who could really build it. But it's not, so that this place exists at all doesn't make much sense. And look, I could sit here and split hairs all day, but I'll save most of it for the end where it matters most. There's still a few sources of frustration even just watching as it comes out, but ultimately I would give Future the thumbs up. The atmosphere is great, the characters are mostly good, their interactions are certainly on point, and a central mystery is just good enough despite some shaky points of setup, and, well, a few cheap tricks. Fun fact, I actually tried to lip read what Tengen was saying here. Didn't take. But yes, it's a sturdy enough addition to the Danganronpa universe that adds enough pathos to justify its existence, including one character who is simply brilliant. When most DR fans are asked who their favourite character is, they usually go for who is most charming, or who they identify with most. Me, I go for whoever adds the most to the story thematically. In DR1, it's Ishimaru. In DR2, it's Hajime. In DR3, it's Ruruka. Danganronpa has no shortage of shitty human beings, but Ruruka is one of the few with a level of fascinating abject denial. She remarks to Kimura that they used to be good friends, and because of that, she initially asks her and Izuyoi for all the favours in the killing game. But she has no qualms trying to twist it back around when Kimura, for once, has the upper hand. It doesn't work, and in the aftermath is a simultaneous mental monologue with the two of them blaming each other for the breakdown of their relationship, even as Kimura is clearly in the right because of the last Despair episode. But there's still enough hidden from the viewer to be a level of plausible deniability. Like, oh, maybe she's a shitty friend, but she still wanted to make it work instead of being just a manipulative, oh, never mind, she kills Izuyoi without a second thought out of self-preservation by forcibly kissing him, essentially emotionally blackmailing him in a similar manner as Monica. And though he says he forgives her, it still puts her in an incredibly cowardly light. By this point, she's killed 2 people trying to keep others from escaping, only to find out soon after that it was for naught. She finds the exit to be a fake. This is a minor missed opportunity. It would have been great to see a breakdown with the revelation that she killed her boyfriend pointlessly, but even in passing, it's great to see a character this unabashedly manipulative but clueless as to her own morality. Celeste may have played Yamada like a fiddle, but she went to the grave with grace when called out on it. But of all the characters who aren't the big villains, Ruruka may put the greatest facade as a good person of all, and I feel like that adds something to DR's emotional core that it didn't quite have before. Though the end of her character arc highlights one of the big problems with Future's pacing. The death order is really transparent. Ruruka dies when she hits the end of her arc, Kimura dies when she hits the end of hers, Kizukura dies at the heart of his martyrdom spiel to Kyoko's father, Gozu dies as soon as he promises to protect everyone, poor Bandai dies after 5 lines just to show off what the NG code poison looks like. I know when you reach a certain level of genre savviness it becomes much harder to avoid this, but still, it wasn't as much of a problem in the games. And let's just say that the general cause of death makes the pattern look contrived. It's real lucky that they happened to be closest to a monitor when their respective arcs were over. But then there's a character whose inclusion and purpose defy all understanding. And, well, it did take me by surprise in a way the other characters did not. But that is not a good thing. Okay, and tell me if I messed this up. Monica developed a robot to kill Gekko Gahara, take her place, and spy on the Future Foundation from the inside. And that's it. That was apparently the extent of her plan, aside from building her robot army from Toa City. So when the 2 leads of UDG reach her, she just gives up, spits some exposition, and fucks off into space. That's it? I figured that either she'd come back and this whole episode would have been pointless, or she wouldn't, and this would be really stupid. Points for attempting to throw everyone off, but once we find out who the true villains are, this makes even less sense. Monica, even as a bratty kid, would have more scope than this. I mean, remember how convoluted the final stretch of another episode gets? There were layers to her evil plans, but she goes to the trouble of making a body double with lots of ridiculous weapons just to spy on them? Really? Plus the fact that she brings up the idea to contact the outside world, and God knows why this wasn't brought up as soon as the game fucking started, means she essentially ratted out herself to Kamaru and Toko. On top of that, there's the prank she pulls, planting a fake knife on Asahina's chest. You might think this is Monika trolling Makoto, but you'd be wrong. This, alongside her spiel on one of the returning characters dying, is actually the writers trolling the audience. Combine that with the aforementioned audio cutting out during Tengen's confession, and it leads to attempts to mess with the viewer that don't quite work. Because this is a mystery series of one consistent thrust, immersion is actually very important if you want to keep things tight and consistent. But highlighting the creative process in obtrusive ways such as these really drag down the atmosphere and tension, which is a shame because the mood is generally as despondent as it needs to be. Hey, wasn't there a prequel arc running at the same time? Okay, Despair has moments, but the body of the work feels pointless for different reasons depending on the episode. Past episode 2, we're actually lucky to see the class we know and love for more than 2 minutes at a time, which makes a lot of episodes dilly-dally on something we're expected to suddenly be interested in. Or, because this is a prequel to a game where everyone literally suffers memory erasure, they'll focus on things that don't matter. I don't care about Nagato being caught in a plane crash, sorry. And although seeing Junko do her Junkoisms is cool and all, it's at the point where she enters that the series really drags its heels. We get it, Junko did things behind the scenes with her sister to enlist Izuru and Class 77 to help destroy the world. We know all of this. Tell us things we don't know, like maybe who the imposter really is? Oh, you're not gonna really give us an answer. You're just gonna suggest he switches disguises when convenient, and that his real face makes him look like a young, fat Heihachi. Any other nuggets of info? Oh, that photo of Jin and Kyoko was actually taken by Kizakura? Why does this actually matter? Yeah, DR3 is far from the first piece of adaptive spin-off material to have these prequel problems, but I dare say there was a level of grace with the rest of the series that just isn't here. Almost all of the Future Foundation owners in Future Arc appear here as if they existed the entire time and had great input into Hope's Peak. And I could sit here and pick it apart all day, but the first half of the Despair arc feels plain insubstantial, and the second is just wonky, and overall there's not enough meat to each episode to just make it an engaging watch. There's just not enough going on in Despair, and when things do go on... well, before that, some positive points. I think the anime restores some horror cred to the series between the general atmosphere of Future and some standout moments of Despair. Like this scene, and this scene.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
Oh, that's not the right footage? Could have fooled me. But if you ask me, the best scene is actually this one, where Hajime becomes Izuru. There's layers to this one, even with what we know about Izuru and how destructive he would be, how much he would take away from Hajime as a person, even with the depths of depravity Hope's Peak are going to in pursuit of hope and talent, that they're willing to perform lab experiments on students to get what they want. Witnessing this final descent is still nerve-wracking. And in his last monologue as Hajime, he states he's doing all this for Chiaki, to impress her and to live up to her words. Even if the creepy sexual undertones were unintentional, this is not a flaw, it's an attribute. This is scary, so much more so than a guy falling on his own chainsaw. And yet, if you remember my stupid little joke video... Editing that made me realise how good this shot is. Well, shot is not the right word because this is 2D animation, but the framing that belies the decapitation that isn't revealed until the body collapses independent of the head is so good. And, actually that might be about it. Right, let's talk about one Chiaki Nanami. Similar to Byakuya appearing at the beginning of DR2 all over again, I was confused as to why Chiaki was here and intrigued as to the explanation it would eventually give. And considering she's essentially the main character of this arc, I figured I would get it. But as it wore on, I started to think a little more about who she was in that game. Her character in the Neo World program made it quite clear she was a complete construct. She existed as a guide for the students fighting back against Monokuma, and no more. She alludes to her brother, the alter ego Monolith, who directly refers to Chihiro from the first game as its father. In this this makes sense because outside of the game, as in by the actual developers, she was intended to be a successor to Chihiro, right down to her name and appearance. I think even her talent as the ultimate gamer was meant to be a long-winded hint of her being just a collection of code. And throughout most of the Despair arc, absolutely none of this completely canonical information matches up with what we see in the anime. How do we get from living student at Hope's Peak to virtual descendant of the ultimate programmer? We almost don't. Yes, because her death is a drag-out, brutal display. It's very sad, even though her existence being a paradox means you can see it coming as soon as the series starts. But I got more pissed off the more the series held off on explaining it, because I was convinced they were just gonna ignore her literal narrative and artistic roots as Chihiro's successor. Prequel material has included retcons like this before, but never has it felt this aggressive. Which is why I stand by this being the biggest narrative misstep. It grinds hard against the canon of the second game and her very design, just for the sake of bringing the whole band back together and attempting to give Hajime more edge to his personality outside of the class. Her being completely artificial works so much better than the anime's explanation of... well, we'll save it for the finale. But let's go back and finish off Future first. So the game is approaching its end by this point, and once Ruruka is dead, things start happening very quickly. For one, oh wow, you actually did it. You actually had the guts to do it. Killing off Kyoko is such a good narrative move, and not just because of the raw gumption of killing off a beloved character. For one, Kizakura gave his life directly to protect Kyoko, so her dying anyway makes his death meaningless in a gloriously depressing way. Her cause of death is her NG code, which is letting Makoto live past the 4th round. And this stands in great contrast both to Ruruka, who killed to stop her own NG code from being triggered, and to Kyoko's own actions in the first game, where she essentially sent Makoto to his death, leading to the idea that her sacrifice is a sort of penance for both. And it later lends a lot of credence to a very good nightmare sequence where the weight of Makoto's sins are brought upon him. Makoto, in general, feels like a sharper main character here because he is put under a level of duress that didn't seem to come through before. But between having to rely on Asahina, having several nightmares, shedding tears, and generally feeling more worn down, it makes his rise to the challenge feel more worthwhile, although he's still a bit too naive. But yeah, killing off Kyoko, great move, and it sets the wheels in motion for the big climax, and we get our big explanation. Aside from the NG codes, no one actually killed each other. They all killed themselves after falling asleep, the member being closest to a monitor being brainwashed into killing themselves during each phase. Again, this just makes the sequence of deaths seem really contrived. And it turns out the ultimate traitor was Tengen. Yeah, he was infected by despair, became a remnant in disguise, and set it all up to get the Future Foundation to kill off each other because... I actually couldn't figure this out. On a pure motivational level, this confused the fuck out of me. I'm not sure what Tengen wanted out of all this. There's a line about forcing Mirai to use his brainwashing hope anime, but to what end? Even running to Wikipedia didn't seem to help. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many plot holes with regards to how he would have set this up. If this all takes place in an underwater replica of the base, where did Tengen get the means to do it? I thought Munakata was the one in charge of construction, and I guess if he's the head honcho, he would have been the one to move all the bodies down there to begin with after everyone was knocked out, and he would have had to set up everyone's NG codes, including his own? And if it wasn't Monica in charge of everything, then where the hell did Monokuma and his spiel about this being their final battle come from? I'm just filling in the blanks myself here, but that I have to do it at all is a huge problem for a mystery series. Yeah, I liked the mystery as we were following it, but this conclusion makes little sense. But whatever, this all makes Mirai snap and try to infect the world with hope rather than despair.
I'm afraid your world is over. In 5 minutes.
Actually, I like the way Mirai is presented as a bad guy a lot. Tengen alludes earlier that really everyone had a small part to play in their downfall, which is true. Chisa covered for Junko, Juzo covered for Junko. Actually, if I can sidetrack myself again, the music that plays during the scene where that happens is interesting. That's the Game Over theme from Catherine. What is it doing here? I'm pretty sure it's a recognised classical piece actually, but I guarantee you that's not the connection most viewers of this are going to make, especially since another anime included that music as a direct reference to Catherine. I guess because we're meant to believe that Juzo's love for Munakata is over. Where? I don't know. Munakata went on a mad killing spree trying to root out despair, so really a lot of the Future Foundation have small parts in the current catastrophe, which is way more interesting than just thrusting culpability on one person's head. But the person who does bear it the most is Ryota Mirai, who was coerced into giving Junko the method through which she could brainwash anyone into becoming servants of despair. He runs away at the time, but in the interim between despair and future, he develops the antithesis, a way to brainwash anyone into becoming servants of hope. Nagito would weep. I'm not saying it's this grand Shakespearean heel turn, but there's thematic relevance in how he becomes the beast he hates in a sordid attempt to make up for what he was coerced into doing to help someone else take over the world. So at the very least, we have a cool setup by both arcs for our finale, which I have very mixed feelings on. Okay, I might have gone on at length about the holes this series has, but at the end of the day, I'm still a fanboy. I do have problems with this scene, like being expected to believe that Hiyoko would ever talk to Mikan again, much less thank her for anything, being told Izuru woke everyone up with his talent and just hand-waving the rest, and wondering where this super high school level elite task force came from. What? We got motherfuckers that can breathe fire now? Why didn't we use them earlier? Seems like they might have been able to help with the remnants. But it's bringing the band back together for one last ride, and truthfully I would have been disappointed otherwise. As a conclusion, it wouldn't have felt as meaty if they didn't bring everyone back, even the people who have no reason to involve themselves in a strictly combat situation. And although it kinda leaves Makoto in the dust, I like how they resolved the situation with Mirai. It's funny, even though this series has tons of dialogue, there's never really been a point where a villain was just talked down rather than thwarted. And their spiel about looking for forgiveness only within oneself actually rings true for both parties. It's corny, but it works. It has thematic resonance. The remnants framing themselves, putting themselves in exile, and taking Mirai with them is, at the very least, a satisfying conclusion to Future's A-plot. And Nagito fanboying over Makoto's level of luck and hope is fucking hilarious. That one joke justifies his existence. It makes up for his flimsy overabundance in the rest of the series. Yeah, I still don't like him very much. So yeah, core plot of Future wraps up nicely. Once we start concluding the rest of the Hope's Peak arc, things start getting dicey really fast. I want to believe in the explanation they give for Chiaki coming back in the VR program. I really do. There's something powerful about the collective unconscious will of the servants of evil thinking about the one person they most want to see again and having that come to fruition even if only in a virtual plane. But it just feels too flimsy, and the fact the explanation gets 2 lines of dialogue after the fact, after the NWP is already finished, makes it seem like a really off-the-cuff decision. It doesn't just gloss over her connections to Chihiro, the Future Foundation and Usami, it sidesteps them completely. So, no, I stand by everything I said. Her inclusion in the series is the biggest narrative faux pas. Actually, no, there might be one other plot point that supersedes that in thematic regression.
God fucking damn it!
I almost feel like I don't have to explain this one. But I will. To be fair, this doesn't really come out of nowhere. It's actually telegraphed at the time if you look closely enough. But it still feels like the wrong move. Not just because it removes all the fancy subtext I was talking about earlier, and not just because of the old standby of the show not really having the gumption to kill off one of its recurring characters, but also because I can't think of a single good reason she should have been brought back. It gives Kimura a bit of retroactive likability because it's her medicine that saves her, but it takes Mikan to stumble upon her and revive her? Huh? And wouldn't it have been more emotionally powerful to have Makoto carry the burden of being the survivor and the experiences he had with Kyoko? Well, I guess we'll never know now. Although it's good to know that Makoto thinks restarting Hope's Peak will work. Even as naive as he is, I'm not sure why he forgot that the world probably blames them for all the chaos. At least, I think they still do. I mean, we're not told, but they would, wouldn't they? Yeah, In the post-finale discussions I had with a couple of friends, it probably says something that we ended up being able to just drag up more unanswered questions and plot holes. Like, something I still don't understand is why Junko picked Class 77 specifically, and only Class 77 specifically, to go around the world and do her bidding. And why she never used her magical brainwashing powers again, particularly in Trigger Happy Havoc. The brainwashing angle seems to be one of the more contentious parts of this series, and I'm not sure I have the room to tackle it even in a video this long as is. I will say that the idea of the world being infected with despair rather than brainwashed with it is a lot scarier, and the series' primary villain trying to do both seems counterproductive. Like, pick one. And I know this is far from the first series to have an ending like this, but the appeal of the big plot twists of the games is that they expand the canon, they expand the stakes, they make things so much more interesting than just a killing game. Trying to compress the scale in the ending by just glossing over, well, the state of the outside world, makes the whole thing kind of implode instead. At least in my opinion. This ending has satisfied others, which I guess makes it better than an ending like Zero Time Dilemmas, which apparently satisfied no one. I aim to find that out for myself as soon as the first re-release comes out. The fact that this is not the first time I've seen an ending like this, and that the core plot is resolved with enough emotional power and clarity to work, means I'm not going to be too hard on this, but yeah, the end of Hope's Peak is about as slapdash as I imagined it was going to be. And really, this anime shows how balked the hope versus despair dichotomy really is. They stretch the meanings of those two words as far as they can go here. They end up just meaning general goodness versus general badness, and Munakata getting hung up on Makoto's, quote, platitudes says more about how out of touch the despair talk can get than I ever could. So, verdict? I like Future, all up. At the end of the day, I wanted to see each new episode as it came out, and it adds things to Danganronpa's emotional and thematic core enough so to justify its existence, which in my opinion makes it more worthwhile than Ultra Despair Girls, which was mostly boring. The atmosphere and character interactions are solid, but the actual mystery leaves a lot to be desired once it's over. Despair, on the other hand, is pretty bad. Just a slog of a watch even without the many plot holes and narrative missteps, some of which I'm sure I've forgotten to mention, although it still has more forward momentum than SAO. That can be the quote. Now, am I still excited for V3? The answer is hell yes. I am thoroughly convinced that V3 is going to be the best game of all time. You know, I've had a bit of an identity crisis over whether my fanboy love of this series is justified, or I'm just trying to latch onto something for nostalgia because I'm getting older. But no, I love these games, and I accept that Danganronpa will never be that critical darling of storytelling. There's still layers to this series that justifies my amplified involvement with it, and the fact that I believe in V3 so much makes me excited for it, which actually hasn't happened in a while. In fact, I think the next game I review will not be one I'm excited for, but rather one that others are excited to see me review. So join me, won't you, as I go back in the saddle again. Oh god damn it, I was looking forward to this one too. Yeah, came out swinging there, didn't I? I refer to him as Kirito, our Lord and Saviour, ironically, compared to Gundam, our Lord and Saviour, about whom I'm entirely sincere. Oh, also he's a werewolf, although nothing like the ones in the fairy tales apparently. We never really find out this guy's name. I assume it's Jacob because, well, you know. And then everyone makes a point of saying that the series was great, emotional and powerful. Except for the last episode. Obviously a very pointed attack on Gainax. I mean, they don't come out and say it, but we know.